what's your view on the Torah? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I think the Torah is the foundation of all Scripture. We interpret everything in Scripture from a Christian perspective from the Torah first. So I look at the prophets from the Torah. I look at the New Testament from the Torah. The Apostle Paul, I think if you study him well, you realize he wasn't teaching against the Torah. Now, some denominations say that he was, but he wasn't. Jesus, Yeshua said, I've not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to pleroo them, to fulfill them.
I've read that somewhere.
Yeah, I bet you have. Yeah.
And I look got there Matthew 5:17, and you should keep reading, guys, through like verse 19. Don't stop in 17.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I'm here with Digital Pastor Jim. Shalom, Jim. How are you doing?
Shalom, my homie. How are you?
Pretty good. Jim, where are you located?
I'm in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Okay. I'm on the east coast of the U.S. right now. Although behind me you see a virtual background, which is from the Bologna University Library. I took that photo there. I've been following some of the stuff you do on TikTok, and what I was really fascinated about what I'm seeing is you get clobbered from two different sides. It's like
I get it from
I think I'm kind of surprised at some of the interactions you're getting. And look, that's the nature of TikTok. Like you people make a video and then somebody else stitches it, and so there's this kind of like confrontational dialogue. But I wouldn't have expected, I guess, coming from my perspective, that the people who are kind of coming at you. So, and you tell me, well, why don't you tell us what are some of these interaction or whatever the word is, these interactions, that you're having with different perspectives online.
Yeah. I look at it as a healthy debate. Sometimes people get hostile, and I don't appreciate hostility, but my goal is to respond in a kind, loving, in my opinion, a godly way, and not react with hostility towards those who attack me with hostility. So I was a little bit of my personal story. I was raised Lutheran originally, and I became a believer at 13 years old and got into Assembly of God, Pentecostal for a little while, Charismatic, Vineyard, Calvary Chapel. If you don't have any of those groups or denominations, not important. And then I was a Calvary Chapel pastor here in Colorado Springs, an associate pastor for several years. And so we teach chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Calvary Chapels, that's their moniker, and we try to really ground people in a good biblical.
What I know about Calvary Chapel, or what I think I know because I've heard this from people, is that they're pro-Israel. Is that right?
Extremely pro-Israel.
Okay,
yes.
like I met a woman once who was Jewish, and she was a Messianic Jew, and she told me the way she ended up making Aliyah, moving to Israel, was she was like just a regular Sunday Christian in Calvary Chapel, and everyone's like, "What are you doing here? Like, we want all the Jews to move to Israel." She's like, "Why would I move to Israel?" And that's how she ended up making Aliyah eventually. So that's the only thing I know about Calvary Chapel.
Oh, so, yeah. Calvary Chapel was part of what's called usually euphemistically the Jesus People movement in the 70s and 80s.
Really?
Led by Pastor Chuck Smith in Southern California.
I'm not sure I know fully what that is. Maybe we'll come back to it. But all right, so you were a pastor at Calvary Chapel.
Yeah. So it's a technically it's not a denomination, it's an association, but we teach the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter. Very, very pro-Israel. And then one day I heard the Shema prayer for the first time, and I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea in Hebrew, and I wept.
Let's assume some of the audience doesn't know what it is. Why don't you tell them?
Yeah, Shema prayer is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 and 5. And I still get emotional 7 years ago just thinking about it. It's Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might or all your strength. And of course, Jesus, Yeshua, quoted that when the Pharisees and Sadducees came and told him to sum up the law and the prophets. And then he added Leviticus 19:18, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I heard the Shema prayer and I wept. I wept uncontrollably. And so I had to find out what it meant. And so I started studying. And usually one of the first people you come across is is Michael Rood on the Rood Awakening, and you know Michael, and that's where I saw you teach as well for the first time. And Michael is larger than life. I'm sure he's like that in real person as
In
well.
real life, he's like that too. Like sitting in his living room, there's no difference. Like he'll like that's what you see is what you get. Like in his living room, like it's the same as him being on stage. He
Yeah,
is like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I kind of figured that. And so then I saw your interactions with him, and then I studied as many things as I could find. And
Mhm.
over the course of the past several years, my life's changed a lot. I still believe the basic tenets of Christianity, but I also like to embrace the Torah. And I watched you and on your broadcast quite a bit. You were super informative. And the other gentleman that you do the study with, his name always slips my mind, the
Keith
Methodist minister.
Johnson,
Keith, yeah, Keith, buddy. How do I forget Keith?
former Methodist
Yeah, former Methodist, yes.
at
And
this point, for sure.
and I learned so much, from listening to you guys interact, and that taught me how to approach Orthodox Jewish people and
Mhm.
talk to them in a loving, kind way without being offensive with my own spiritual background. And so I made
Let's stop
friends.
there for a minute. I taught you how not to be offensive to Orthodox Jews. That's a great compliment to me. I think a lot of times I offend Orthodox Jews at this stage of my life, probably unintentionally. When I was
Yeah,
younger, perhaps intentionally. So I take that as a compliment.
yeah. Well, that's what I appreciated so much about your interaction with Keith, is because you guys talked about your tradition, and
Mhm.
if you approach Orthodox people to discussing your traditions, it's way less offensive to them than if you talk about different theological points, as what I gathered. So, and so I made friends with the Chabad rabbis here in town,
Oh wow.
built some rapport there, and so about 8 months ago, I was asked to take over a church here in Colorado Springs. So I'm the senior pastor
Hmm.
at Springs of Living Water Church, and we're growing. We try to embrace the biblical expression of the feasts of God. I don't like to say the feasts of the Jews because it's really God's feast He gave to the Israelites, and then I love studying the different traditions: the Ashkenazic, the Sephardic, the Mizrahi, and any tradition I can find, because it adds fullness to the picture. And then of course the
Mhm.
Karaite traditions. I learned the perspective of the Karaites from listening to your teachings, and I've got a series of books, Karaite Jews in Egypt by let's see,
Rattle
El
Kotzi.
Codici, and
Rattle
so
Kotzi.
yeah, I probably said it wrong. And so I love it.
Hmm.
I can't get enough of it. And I
Okay.
had a Chabad rabbi say, "Jim, you have the neshama of a Jew."
Okay. And that means, for those who don't know, the spirit of the spirit in the sense of like the soul of a Jew.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
wow, interesting. So all right. So I've seen you on TikTok, and I see you get clobbered from the one side, and maybe it's not clobbered. Confrontational is it's not necessarily confrontational. The fact, well, we'll get into it. So you're being challenged, to put it that way, and maybe like you said, it's a healthy conversation. I just didn't expect such a big pushback from, and maybe this is me being in my little bubble. You get a really big pushback, it seems, from like Christians who say, Jim, you're putting people under the law. That's
Yeah.
done away with. Well, there's no more Passover, it's Easter. Well, why are you doing that? And then I see you get pushback from the other side, and I'm laughing because, like, those two guys could have a conversation with each other. And I don't mean specific people, right? But those
Right.
two perspectives could have a conversation with each other, which would be different than the conversations they're having with you. So if the pushback I see from the other side is, you got to follow, Yeshua was a Jewish rabbi. You have to follow what the Jewish rabbis teach. You can't just follow the Bible without the traditions of the rabbis. So
Hmm.
so I would love to see the conversation between the two sides that are pushing on you, because what an interesting conversation that would be. They would probably agree to a large extent. Well, no, I don't think the other side would
Oh
agree with
no. Yeah,
the
they're
Christians.
diametrically opposed.
But you're kind of like, we have an expression in Yiddish, nishtahin nishtaher. You're neither here nor there, right? You don't fit into either camp in a sense,
Right.
and you're getting pushback from both sides. So that's what I find so interesting. So, and I've seen other people go through that, like Michael Rood. But like here, you're coming from like, and you're even like now the pastor of a Sunday church. Am I right about? Is that a Sunday church?
No, we meet on the Sabbath.
Oh, you meet on Shabbat. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And
what's the name
and
of
we
the church again?
It's Springs of Living Water on our website,
Okay.
if it's okay, www.springsoflivingwater.co. And we do our service. It's very different from a traditional church. So we usually do it podcast style. There'll be me, and Caleb was here a few minutes ago. Caleb and I will teach from the Torah portion that week and the
Oh,
Haftarah.
wow.
And then also the Brit Hadashah. I study, because with Christians, of course, we're coming from very little background in the Torah, so I don't have to go very deep to blow their mind. and try to reintroduce them to what is this book all about. One of my favorite memes on Facebook is a picture of a guy wearing tzitzit and a robe and a big beard, and he said Christians always forget Jesus, Yeshua, was a tzitzit wearing, Torah teaching rabbi in Israel.
It's really interesting. I once read I think it was like a book or something, or an article, and it talked about how in Western civilization and not just Western civilization, and even in China, there's this actually in China as well. Yeah, there's been this theme in the last couple hundred years of imposing whatever your view of the world is on Jesus. So Mao, who is I guess the founder of modern communist China, he portrayed Jesus as a communist revolutionary, right? So in Acts chapter 2, when they were all sharing things in common, that's the forerunners of the communist revolution, right? Like, I mean, you hear that, you're like, what is this guy crazy? But but it's an example of how people like impose whatever they kind of have on Jesus, on Yeshua. And like Mao doesn't need to do that. He doesn't come from a Judeo-Christian culture, but this is just a thing people do. So I don't remember how we got into that, but oh yeah. You said that people forget that Yeshua was wore tzitzit, and right. So
from the Torah.
And what that made me think of is the Pope who recently had Jesus wrapped in a keffiyeh as a baby, right? Well, what's that about? That's a very deliberate political statement that Jesus came from Bethlehem, therefore he was a Palestinian. Even though if he was alive on October 7th in Kibbutz Be'eri, he would have been kidnapped and strangled to death with bare hands the way that Kfir Bibas was. So that just get us banned from YouTube, but that's what happened, guys. I think I want to understand better. I've had some interaction with the. Well, let me ask this. So is your church is it a church? Let's start with that.
Yeah, it's a church.
Okay, because I'll hear people who will say, "Oh no, we're Messianic Jews." Oh, your mother and father were Jewish. Oh no, I'm not Jewish. What do you mean you're a Messianic Jew? Well, and then and I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying it's extremely confusing to them, and even more so to me. So you're not saying you're a Messianic Jew. You're a Christian who has a church, but you meet on Shabbat and you what's your view on the Torah? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I think the Torah is the foundation of all Scripture. We interpret everything in Scripture from a Christian perspective from the Torah first. So I look at the prophets from the Torah. I look at the New Testament from the Torah. The Apostle Paul, I think if you study him well, you realize he wasn't teaching against the Torah. Now, some denominations say that he was, but he wasn't. Jesus, Yeshua, said, I've not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to pleroo them, to fulfill them.
I've read that somewhere.
Yeah, I bet you have. Yeah.
And I look at their Matthew 5:17, and you should keep reading, guys, through like verse 19. Don't stop in 17.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, so I'm trying in my mind, I'm trying to hold those two opposing ideas, what some churches, Christian churches think are opposing ideas, back together. The God of the Old Testament, of the Torah, he's a God of mercy and compassion, and he loves people, and he wants them to come to himself. And then he gives us a path to get there. And that's through, the Levitical priesthood and the offerings. And as a Christian pastor, I couldn't have told you 7 years ago what the 7 feasts of God were. I couldn't have told you. I didn't know. I went to Bible college. We just wouldn't talk about it. But now I see there's an integrated, as a Chuck Missler, as a famous Bible teacher from many years ago. He'd say 66 books by over 40 different authors, and we now realize it's an integrated message system from outside our time domain. It helps us understand how to get back what was lost in the garden 6,000 years ago. God wants to walk with all of us in the cool of the day. And we don't throw out the Torah, we embrace the Torah. And even things that are hard for me to understand from a Christian Western worldview, I'm trying to deconstruct my Christian Western worldview and step into a Hebraic worldview. And you live in both worlds, probably more so than the average person, because you live in the United States and you spend a lot of time in Israel, et cetera. But that's hard for us to embrace in the far Western world. And so that's what I try to do, is reintroduce a very Hebraic worldview. It's about honor versus dishonor instead of right versus wrong. It's about understanding that God wants to restore what was lost. And I feel like
well on that. It's about honor versus dishonor. That's really interesting. Talk about that. That's
yeah, because there's stories in the Torah that if you look at it straightly from a strict Western right versus wrong perspective, it's confusing. But when you realize it's about honor versus dishonor, like Judah, and was it Tamar? Is that her name?
Tamar, yeah.
Yeah, that's a confusing story from a Western perspective.
When I was in second grade, I was going to a Jewish day school. So like the whole morning was learning Hebrew subjects, and we read through the book of Genesis from beginning to end. And years later, I read it again myself, and I'm like, I never read that story. What happened? And I realized in second grade, they skipped that chapter for obvious reasons. Well, I don't know. Yeah. They didn't think we were mature enough to understand it. So
it's a hard one. It's a hard one to understand.
So tell me how that feeds into, well, maybe I don't know that it's a hard chapter. It's maybe it's hard for a second grader, but and maybe it's hard for an adult, but for different reasons, right? They thought we didn't know about what a prostitute was, and how do you explain that to a second grader, right? So tell me how that's about honor versus dishonor.
So from a strictly Christian Western worldview, we look at things culturally, especially the baby boomer generation and the Generation X, from a right versus wrong perspective. It's wrong. She was prostituting herself to her father-in-law to have a baby. And after two of his sons died, right? And so, but when you step out of our Western world and come into a Near Eastern worldview, you realize it's about honor. She was being dishonored by her father-in-law. She wanted to raise a son up in the name of her dead husband. And that system of honor was so important to her that she was going to accomplish that goal, even by questionable means. And that's why Judah, he was going to have her stoned to death for being a prostitute, but he was the one that impregnated her.
So I think there's a little bit more, there's some more complexities in that story. And it has to do with what they say they call in English the levirate marriage. I think that comes from Latin, that term, like Levir is a Latin term. In Hebrew, we call it yibum. But let's not get too deep into that story. What I think is most beautiful about that story is she then sends him the proof that he was the one who had relations with her. And he says, Hitzad kami meni, which you could translate as she was more righteous than me. Right? Which is, I think, a profound statement. He's not saying she's completely in the right. But she's more righteous than I am, which is definitely the case here. Because he was leaving her to languish. I don't want to get too much into the story. I've talked about it before. But because let's move on. But no, that's a great. I like how you're looking at that. That's really interesting. Because there is something that, I took anthropology when I was in college, and there's this concept of an honor culture. And if you can't understand an honor culture, there's a lot of things you can't understand in the world today. When there's these things called honor killings, and it's something that somebody who was raised in America in a Western culture, let's say, because you could be raised in America and not in a Western culture.
True.
In a Judeo-Christian culture, let me be more accurate, has trouble understanding what an honor culture is. And I guess that's not entirely true. Like if you grew up in rural Sicily, you came from an honor. In certain parts of America, you come from honor culture as well, actually.
Right.
But the example I've heard is like, let's say in prison, and thank God I've only been to prison as doing ministry. But from what I understand, if let's say somebody trips you in the the lunch line or whatever, you the response is to go and beat that person near the end of their life. Because if you don't, you've now made yourself a target. And that is entirely about honor culture, right? And a very extreme honor culture, obviously, in that context, right? But that's how people end up like, murdering their sister or their daughter. And you're like, wait, you killed your daughter to save the family honor? That doesn't even make sense to me. I don't. Does that make sense to you? But that's like a Middle Eastern honor culture thing. I'm not sure that was going on in Torah times, but there's overlap there, right? Meaning like
Sure.
it's more of an honor culture in some ways than like where it talks about the redeemer of blood, which is if somebody accidentally murders your close relative, then you have a familial duty to go kill that person, and so they can go to the city of refuge and then they're protected. Well, why would I kill some guy because he was swinging an axe and it killed my child, let's say, right? Like that's a horrible, tragic thing, but why would I? So that was an honor culture thing, right? It wasn't that you were required to by the Torah, but the Torah said, okay, we'll let you do that because that's part of the culture, right? But we're not going to let you do it if they go to the city of refuge and the person's protected, right? So yeah, so there's definitely something to be said about the honor culture. There's an aspect there, and then you look at stuff that happens in let's say in the Middle East and in well, not just the Middle East. It happens in Pakistan leads the world along with the Palestinian Authority in honor killings, right? And you're like, why would you kill your sister? It doesn't like that's the crazy. I have four sisters. I can't even imagine, right? It's the strict. Like that dishonors your family, but to them it protects the family honor. So, okay, yeah. So there's definitely a cultural divide. Some of it is maybe a good thing,
Sure.
but I think it helps to understand the culture of the Tanakh. I've always said, I'd say history, language, and context. So, so talk to me about how the Christians. And let me ask this question. This is an important question. There's some people in my audience who are hearing this and saying, "Oh, digital pastor Jim, he calls himself a Christian. I'm done. I'm out." They'll say, "Hey, I'm not a Christian." They say we're Torah keepers, we're believers, we're Hebrew roots, we're Messianic Jews, even though we're not Jewish. What would be your response? I love how you're so level-headed. How you're not like punching people. You're like, here's my calm response. What's your level-headed response to that, Jim?
So I think one of the things, whatever side is attacking me, whether it's the evangelical Christian side who's saying, oh, you can't put people under the law. The law doesn't bind me up. It sets me free. Knowing the rules of the process helps me understand how to live a better life. It's not a bad thing. The 10 Commandments are beautiful. The 10 words, and then Paul talks about following the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. And so, the letter of the law, I'll never be a Levite. I'll never do sacrifices in the temple. As far as I know, I have no Jewish heritage. My great grandmother was from Palermo, Sicily. And she insisted I be circumcised on the 8th day. So she was probably a converso.
She probably grew up in an honor culture, my guess would be, where they had, that's the whole idea of vendettas. Well, let's all right, go on.
Yeah, exactly. The Sicilianos, buongiorno. And but the idea I think is I think that what Yeshua taught is that he said, they will know you're my disciples. How? Because you say God's holy name correctly? No, he could have said that. Because you follow the 10 Commandments correctly, or the Torah, or the oral written Torah? No, he could have said that. He said they'll know you're my disciples by your love one for another. Not because you agree on everything, not because you got everything perfect and right, but because you have love one for another. And he said, if you love me, you will follow my commandments. And some people define that as just the 2 commandments, love your neighbor as yourself, love the Lord your God. But I see that as a summary of the original commandments that Moses was given.
Don't a lot of Christians say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that only applies to the commandments that are reiterated in the New Testament, along with ones that are added in the New Testament? Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's what Reformed theology will say.
Okay.
And so, but I disagree. I think Reformed theology is neat and tidy. It's very Western. All their theology is it fits in nice little boxes on the shelf, and the boxes don't touch each other. But the Hebraic worldview, everything overlaps and intertwines. It's spirituality, physicality. Everything's it's very Eastern worldview. It's all connected and interconnected. Where in the Greco-Roman Western worldview, we would like everything divided up and in neat, tidy little boxes.
Like in the Tanakh, you don't have a soul; you are a soul. That's an example.
Yeah. I love that Hebraic perspective, and it's an interconnectedness, not only just within yourself, but within your congregation, with your family, with your community at large, with the world around you. What is considered the least of the commandments? Generally speaking, you know way better than I do, but that's when you come across a mother bird with her nest, and if you have to eat one of them because you're hungry on the road, you have to leave the mother alive and eat the eggs. And that's, I don't know if that's maybe the correct understanding, but that's the least of the commandments to my understanding. Why would the Father care so much about such a thing? Because he's trying to communicate a message to us. Show respect. What is the first commandment with a promise? Honor your father and mother. And to me, that command to let the mother bird go, don't kill the mother bird with the eggs, so she can reproduce again. You're honoring its mother, so she can go and reproduce. And it almost brings tears to my eyes.
Let's look at that verse, because that's actually, I was just discussing this with my wife. We call that shiluach haken, sending away the what do you call that? The nest.
Right.
And so it's in Deuteronomy. Could you read that? Deuteronomy 22, verses 6 and 7. And the reason you bring that up, I don't know if this is deliberate. I think it probably is. So there's 2 commandments in Deuteronomy. It says if you do them, you'll have a long life. One of them is honor your father and mother. It's in the 10 Commandments. And the other is shiluach haken in Deuteronomy 22. In the Hebrew, it's 6 and 7. I don't know about in the English.
Yeah. And I want to comment. Your wife's name's Linnea. Is that how you pronounce her name? Linnell. She is wonderful. I love her devotions on Facebook. I forward them to everybody.
Okay.
She's such a sweet. And one of my favorite
They're also
videos.
on TikTok, everybody, and on YouTube. We're trying to get them on the community.
Yeah, I forward your stuff every chance I get. And I love the videos of you and her driving through Israel. And she says, Nehemia, what had happened over there? And she's just beaming. She's glowing. And then you're talking about what happened historically over there and over there. And
so this literally happened where we're driving to some romantic getaway. And she's like, Nehemia, what happened over there? I'm like, oh, that's where Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. She's like, why aren't we going there? Forget the romantic getaway. And that we end up literally spending the day at a place called the Muhrakan, which is the burnt ground on the top of Mount Carmel, where Elijah defeated the prophets. Like literally, Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal, and it's overlooking one of Israel's main air bases, Ramat David. It's a really dramatic place. And it literally looks down on Megiddo, right? Armageddon. Like what a dramatic place there. It's an incredible place. And and I'm like, let's go to the romantic spot because I've been there 30 times. And she's like, no, this is where I want to go. And yeah, it's an incredible. Israel's an amazing place. I've heard Christians describe it as the 5th gospel, right? Because like when you're in Israel, it's just like this flood of information, which I kind of am used to because I lived there for over 20 years. But
It's
all right. Deuteronomy 22, 6 through 7. Let's have a look at that.
Okay. If, as you are walking along, you happen to see a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground with chicks or eggs, and the mother bird is sitting on the chicks or the eggs, you are not to take the mother with the chicks. You must let the mother go. But you may take the chicks for yourself so that things will go well with you, and you will prolong your life. I love that. It's almost a double
I've never
meaning.
heard that described as the least of the commandments, but I like the idea. And maybe there's some literature on that somewhere I'm not familiar with, but definitely if you compare it to honor your mother and father, it seems pretty trivial, right? Like who cares about a bird? So why does he, like, what an obscure thing. And look, I've been hit by this by people in, I would call them like maybe the fringe of the Hebrew roots movement, who will come at me and say, Nehemia, do you really think God cares about mixing different fabrics? Do you think really God cares about? And so what they've done is they go through the Hebrew roots process. I'll call it Hebrew roots, right? They may not call it that.
Yeah.
They've come to trying to understand the Hebrew roots of Christianity, and then they come out the other end spiritualizing everything. All of that has an allegorical meaning, and of course they can tell you what it is, and therefore and I'm not disputing that, but now it's in their eyes it's lost not only lost but never really had the literal meaning. And then they'll say, does God really care what you eat? He doesn't care if you eat pig. That's all a metaphor. And this is Hebrew roots people who will, like I said, maybe like at the extreme, who they came out of Christianity through Hebrew roots, came out the other end. Everything was not just spiritualized, but it was always meant spiritually. And my response is, he seemed to kind of care with Adam and Eve, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna take him at his word, but so let's say this has a spiritual application we can come up with, but it also is meant literally. And God actually apparently does care that you shoo away the bird before you take its eggs, and it's talking here about wild animals, of course, right? I don't think it's talking about domesticated chickens. But meaning the alternative is I kill the mother and take the eggs, and it's saying don't do that, send away the mother. And this is usually interpreted by Jews as like mercy on the animal. I don't know. In any event, so do you know the story, the famous rabbinical story about this?
No, go ahead and tell me.
So there was a rabbi who's referred to as the other one, and not in a nice way, right? It's like that guy.
Right.
He's called Achet.
Right.
And his real name was Elisha ben Abuya. And the story is that he was walking on the road and he saw a father and a son who were walking in the opposite direction. And he overheard the father pointed to a tree. Stop me if you know this story.
No.
And he said to his son, go climb up the tree and shoo away that bird and take the eggs. And the boy climbs up the tree, shoos away the bird and takes the eggs. And as he's climbing down, he falls and breaks his neck and dies. And Elisha ben Abuya, who is one of the greatest rabbis, he sees this and he said it's all a lie. God promised long life if you obey your parents, you honor your parents, and if you shoo away the bird and when you take the eggs. And I see right in front of me the boy died. It's all a lie. And he became we would call today a deist. A deist is somebody who says, yeah, there's a God in the universe. Obviously, everything came from somewhere, but he has nothing to do with us. He has no direct interaction with individual humans. So he became a heretic. And you call it an apostate, but really he just stopped believing in a God who interacts in the world. And I don't know if the story is a true story. A lot of rabbinical stories are parables to teach you a lesson. Here's what's important about the lesson. What did Elisha ben Abuya get wrong? What he got wrong was assuming that when God promises long life, it means in this world. Because maybe it means in the world to come. It could be in this world or in Olam Haba, the world to come. And it's not like Elisha ben Abuya didn't know what the world to come was. He obviously did. It was a rabbinical concept around for centuries, for sure, by the time he, and I believe it's in the Tanakh as well, in Daniel 12:2 and Isaiah 66 and many other passages. So, but he was assuming it's only in this world. And so when he saw the boy die, he said, okay, God lied. And therefore, this isn't from God. Because he had imposed a paradigm on the Bible, and that paradigm didn't fit reality, so the Bible's wrong, not my paradigm. Right? What a profound story. To me, that's such a profound story, whether it happened or not. It probably didn't happen, right? But it's a great story. He did become a heretic. That's probably true, because otherwise, why do they keep talking about him? Right. But the specific thing he saw, I don't know if that happened. But it's a beautiful, profound story. And there's an example where I'll look to the rabbis and say, I don't have to agree with them or be bound by their authority, but they have profound wisdom I can learn from. And it's a lesson not to make the mistake of Elisha ben Abuya, right? Or the greater mistake of forcing my paradigm on the Bible, and then when it doesn't fit the Bible's wrong. Right? That's dangerous.
That is, it is, and
So,
that's thin ice. When I first started, I heard the Shema, and then I met the local Chabad rabbi. I won't mention his name just for privacy's sake. He's a wonderful man,
mhm.
but I don't know if he wants everybody to know what his name is. But and so when I went to him and I first started talking to him, I was like, Rabbi, I said, I'm not here to teach you what I know. I want to know what you know. I want to see how you look at the Torah. You've been studying this your whole life, and your people have been studying this for 3,500 years. A lot longer than me and my people. I come from a broken family. What is this saying, Isaiah? I'm a man of unclean lips, and I come from a people of unclean lips. Take the
Well, that was Isaiah talking about the Jews, and I would say that's true about us as well, and maybe we can both learn from each other. But
yeah.
what I love about what your interaction with this rabbi, from what you're telling me, is that I see videos of this online where it's everything going wrong. You'll have this. I saw a video recently. This woman's in Israel, and she gets in the street in Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, and she's preaching with her microphone. You Jews need to accept Yeshua. And that's a recipe for
Disaster.
hurt feelings,
Yeah.
because the feeling there is, okay, you're trying to impose something on us, and it's specifically something on us that my ancestors died not to accept, and you're telling me I need to accept it. You know what? Between you and me, maybe it's right. Let's leave that open as a possibility. But if the way, I don't think it is, or I would believe that.
Yeah.
But do I believe it's a possibility? 100%. But if you go to somebody and you say you have to accept this, or you're going to suffer forever in an eternal conscious torment in hell, and all I could think of is my ancestor who suffered from a physical torment here on earth, or my ancestor's cousin, maybe, right?
Right.
Because this is what we're raised on in Jewish history, for better or for worse, and look, it's not just Jewish history. Go look at October 7th,
Oh, I know. Yeah.
right? Let's not go into that, but
Yeah.
we're hearing from some of the survivors things that happened, and it really sounds like stories I've heard about from the First Crusade in the 11th century, when the Crusaders in Germany said, "Why should we go all the way to the Holy Land? We have infidels here among us, the Jews. Let's start with them." And the stories I heard on October 7th, some of them were actually worse
Yeah.
than the
Yeah.
things I heard in history. And so imagine if somebody came to me and said, well, Allah is the greatest, and you have to accept him. You have to proclaim Allahu Akbar. And all I can think of, whether right or wrong, all I can think of when I hear that is the people who shouted that on October 7th. And I'm not trying to compare Christians to Muslims.
No.
But think of it from the Jewish perspective, how much suffering there was.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, that was the Catholic Church. Okay, right. The average Jew doesn't know the difference between the Catholic and the
Catholics to them, right?
And you know what? There was persecutions by the Protestants, since 1517, when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses. A lot went on since then as well. Horrifying. Some of it quite recently, relatively recently. So the point is, if you want to have a dialogue, coming at somebody and saying, well, you have to accept this or you're going to suffer. And all I could think of is the historical collective suffering that happened because of the thing you're asking me to accept.
Right.
That's painful, and it's not productive.
So that's why whenever I have a chance to talk to a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, Chabad rabbi, I talk about the Torah portion. I talk about the Tanakh.
I love how level-headed you are, and how you're always so calm. That's what I love. I'm like, I got to have this guy on the program, because that's a calmness I aspire to. I used to be a hothead. I think I'm much more calm now.
Yeah.
And much more level. But I used to be, well, I'm right, everybody else is wrong. I need to why don't they see that I'm right?
Right. Why can't they
got to beat it into them.
So
I've been wrong enough times where I'm like, okay, let's leave open the possibility that I'm wrong and have more of a dialogue.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what I love about the Jewish perspective on discussing things. You probably know how to say it in Hebrew. I just know the English translation. This is Torah and this is Torah. We're both discussing Torah. We may disagree.
Well, so the expression is something so there's something I actually disagree with.
Okay.
It's a rabbinical idea. The story is that there was a debate between the house of Shammai, meaning the disciples of Shammai, which was around the time of Yeshua. Shammai and Hillel were about a generation before. The house of Shammai and house of Hillel are exactly when Yeshua is being born and coming up in the world around the year 0 or 1, right? There's no 0, 0. And the story is that there was a great debate for 3 years between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel, until one day a voice called out from heaven, a heavenly voice, what's called a bat kol, an angelic voice, and said, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, both these and those are the words of the living God, right? Now, if you take that story literally, I profoundly disagree with it, because two things can't be true. Let me rephrase that. Two things can be true, but God is not going to say one thing and its opposite and have them both true at the same time. So one of the excuses that later rabbis came up with was that, well, the opinion of the house of Hillel was true in this world, and in the world to come, it'll be the house of Shammai, right? That was a later kind of, I would say, almost like Karaite reaction, right? Because my Karaite reaction is, no, there's only one divine truth. We may not know what it is, but there's only one divine truth. That's where I am today. So this solution that later rabbis come up with is, no, there can be two divine truths, just not at the same time. Right. Or they're not applicable. They can both be true at the same time, but they're not both applicable at the same time. Right. So that was the rabbinical reaction. But my position is, I don't know what the truth is. I think I do.
Sure.
But I thought I did 30 years ago, and I'm pretty sure now I was wrong. So what else am I not wrong about? That, that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard that phrase, no.
So the Dunning, guys, look this up. This is one of the most profound things I ever heard. I heard it years ago. So Dunning and Kruger were these two psychologists, I guess. I don't really know. The Dunning-Kruger effect is this idea that when people know a little bit, they think they know a lot. When they've learned just you learn the first truth, right? You learn that nowhere in the. I'll give you my Karaite reaction. The rabbis are wrong about a certain thing that I'm able to definitively prove, and I've read the Bible and I can see they're wrong. It says don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, and the rabbi said that means don't eat meat and milk together. Yeah. Well, I can see they're wrong about that. I've read the Torah. I don't see anywhere where it says that. So therefore, I'm right about everything else. Okay, so that's called being on Mount Stupid. That's right. So it's a graph. It goes up, and then I don't know for those listening. So it's a bell curve. So when you're at the top of you start out, you don't know anything, and then you go up, and then you're on the top of Mount Stupid. Well, now I know everything, and everybody else is wrong. And then as you learn more and more and more and more, you realize, wow, there's a whole lot I don't know. And that's I forget what they call that, but that's like a mature wisdom in my view, right? Yeah. When I was 17, I had read the Bible in Hebrew twice, from beginning to end, the Tanakh in Hebrew, from beginning to end, and I thought I know everything. I actually had this idea a little bit late, a few years later. I'm going to go to Hebrew University, but why would I study Bible? I know the Bible. I am sure I know it better than the professors. And then I learned Hebrew linguistics, and I realized there were libraries full of things I didn't know, and I got to visit some of those libraries, right? So a lot of the people, I see this in religion because it happened to me, is they're like, oh, I was lied to, that Christmas isn't in the New Testament. Now and I don't want to be insulting to anybody, right?
No.
But they think they know everything, and there's actually, let's be a little bit humble. Right. I'll speak for myself. I need to be humble because I was wrong about a lot of things when I thought I knew everything. And I think that's really important, to be level-headed and calm. Agreed. And if somebody attacks you and says, how could you say something so stupid? Don't you know that such and such was done away with? There's this guy on TikTok. I won't say his name, but this guy on TikTok, he knows everything. He's got a PhD. He's very knowledgeable. Everybody else is wrong, and everything else they say is stupid. And you know what? He doesn't know as much as he thinks he knows. And again, I won't say it doesn't matter who he is. There's a million of him, right?
Sure, there is.
And look, I've seen there's what really drives me, what bothers me, let's put it that way, is when I'll see somebody who isn't coming from his agnostic, maybe atheist perspective, secular perspective. There's this one guy who comes from a Christian perspective. He's an evangelical Christian, and he saw the formula of the agnostic guy with the PhD, and he's like, I'm going to do that as an evangelical, and I'll just be this obnoxious person who goes through people's videos and says why they're wrong.
Right.
And it comes off to me, and I'm not a Christian, right? But it comes off to me as, I know this is cliche, where's the love in that?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
look, maybe that appeals to it. It gets a lot of views. It resonates with the TikTok algorithm. But I watch that, I'm like, that feels so dirty and so hateful.
Agreed.
That's how I don't.
Agreed.
That's how
Dr. Chuck Missler always used to say. He said, "The more you know, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you actually know."
That's the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, is that what it's called? Okay.
That's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. All right. That's the fancy name for it.
Caleb, make a note.
Caleb, would you pop in and say hello?
Caleb, I want you to come say hi.
I was just listening to your conversation.
Hey, Caleb, shalom.
Shalom.
Are you over there at the, tell us what the name is, Springs of
Living Water.
Yes, yeah. Springs of Living Water.
There it is.
I just ordained Caleb last Shabbat as my assistant pastor.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right, guys, it's there in Colorado Springs. Sounds like a really fascinating situation.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.